The Building State Capacity and Productivity Center, or BSCP, logo. The BSCP Center, in cooperation with the Education Commission of the States, presents Engaging Stakeholders about ESSA. Alan Morgan of BSCP talks with state chiefs. Alan Morgan and Jeremy Anderson, President of the Education Commission of the States, discuss collaborating with stakeholders to achieve educational goals.
So talk with me a little bit about, and our viewers, about what you see as kind of the key outcomes that really have to come about because of this collaboration. What incentive do they really have to make a difference with interaction with each other?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of the states that are really looking to bring together some disparate people within their state, people who may not view the same issue the same way. But the collaboration is really going to be important in how an implementation takes place in the state. I think in many of these states, you could say that, well, this is the responsibility of the state education agency that the chiefs run. Mm-hmm. But it's not that simple in a state if you're not really thinking about how you're engaging all of the different players across the state. Does the chief get along with the governor? Would they go to dinner together? I mean, is the legislature one that has been playing well with education policy and being supportive, or do they have a different view on it? But I think even more important on the policy side, what we're seeing in states is the question of who are you really engaging for this conversation? I mean, are you talking with district leaders and with parents? Are you talking with representatives of key demographics so that you can really find out what are the needs that they see in their community to have a meaningful education for their children? And we're seeing states that are doing that quite well. I know the 5 chiefs that have been videoed have all talked a little bit about the value of having collaboration and working across different lines. Collaboration, from what we're seeing with ESSA, is not just collaboration between the state education agency and the legislature and the governor.
That's right.
But it's really much deeper within the state, saying, are you engaging business leaders on what the workforce needs are? Are you talking with key communities to make sure that there's representation for what's needed for English language learners or for key districts that may have lower outcomes than other districts? And how do we make sure that all students have an equitable educational opportunity? And that's really where I think collaboration is going to be a big key, where we're going to see some states that may have policies that are easier to implement because they've done the collaborative method versus others where it was just a policy they put out and it may have been more difficult to actually see an outcome.
Alan Morgan and Pedro Rivera, Secretary of Education for the Pennsylvania Department of Education, discuss encouraging stakeholder involvement.
One of the areas that we're priding ourselves in is that this is a very inclusive process. We've brought together hundreds of stakeholders to really engage in 4 areas of the process: educator effectiveness, educator certification, accountability, and assessment. Okay. And our commitment to our stakeholders, and our stakeholders are everything from educators to those being educated and industry leaders. So and policymakers. So our commitment to them was that this would be their plan. So we have an idea of what we're starting to hear already. But I couldn't necessarily say this will be the plan because we're allowing our stakeholders to drive the plan. And we're being an active participant.
Tell me a little bit about how your agency communicates with this incredibly broad array of stakeholders on what will be some very new behaviors that are going to have to be put in place in Pennsylvania.
So what we did first when we started off, we engaged with partners that we connect with on a frequent basis, but we've asked them to, at minimal, communicate and share this information with 10 people. Really? And we've given them the opportunity to share with as many people as they wanted. Right. And as a result, it's been amazing. We've been getting a response from our stakeholders, individuals who want to participate, but we've also been very clear this is a working group. So folks have volunteered to be part of the working group. Others have asked to come and observe our open meetings, so they will be able to just show up and observe the process as it takes place. We're engaging very aggressively social media. So while the meeting's taking place, we'll be tweeting out, using our Facebook page, and just getting that information for folks who are at home, and making the research, the agenda, the notes from the meeting available to everyone on our website. So I think we're going to make the information available. It's just us now ensuring that anyone who wants to be actively engaged and involved at different levels will know they have access to their information.
Alan Morgan of BSCP and Joy Hoffmeister, State Superintendent of Public Instruction for the Oklahoma Department of Education, on stakeholder engagement in leaving Common Core.
A lot of what used to be considered as federal mandate and responsibility has now been shifted to your office, your folks, the school systems, teachers, and others here in Oklahoma. What's kind of top on the list in terms of challenge and opportunity?
Well, there is a lot of opportunity. We have been asking for greater input at the state level. I believe those closest to students have the best hope of solving complex and lingering challenges, and it is a return away from a Washington D.C. more cookie cutter approach to how we drive change, to one that is more locally driven at the state level. What we did was we began then with a desire to have high outcomes for students and really identify those standards that needed to be set in order to achieve that. So we looked at the highest performing states in math and English language arts, and we brought in those who were the architects for their process, interviewed them, spent a full day with a steering committee that was made up of people in higher ed, career tech, commerce, as well as in the education communities throughout the state, each represented there. And we used that as a launching for a stakeholder-driven, with great expertise as the first focus, but a stakeholder-driven process. And so we got to work naming the writers of that and modeled after the success of others. So we didn't start with a blank page. We began with what works, and we went from there, and we included parents, teachers, business leaders throughout the state, really listening to what was important to them, what they felt had been lacking, because without the buy-in and the voice of Oklahomans, we would be right back where we started. So it is truly, at the end of that process, a time where we can say we have Oklahoma standards written for Oklahoma, by Oklahoma, but with an eye on high achievement to lift education outcomes in our state. And that process also included legislators early on, so that when it was time for them to look at that final product, it wasn't the first time they'd seen it, and their constituents were saying, we were a part of this, we vetted it, we have confidence, and we're ready to go. We are a diverse state, and we are a rural state, but we also have some areas of urban and suburban concentration. And so it would be inappropriate for us to just make sweeping either legislative changes or policy changes without a real, genuine, authentic effort to draw out the kinds of input that is needed. Oftentimes, people wait for someone to come forward, and then you are driving policy based on just those who happen to be coming to the Capitol or coming to a state board meeting. That's the squeaky wheel in some circumstances. So it's very important, I think, as a leader to seek out input and to include people who might have not understood their part in giving their voice. I think business is a part of that. We started by building a network of advisory councils, about 20 of those, and that sounds unwieldy, but it was something that we dedicated a position in my cabinet to oversee and coordinate.
Alan Morgan and June Atkinson, State Superintendent of Public Instruction for the North Carolina Department of Education, discuss communication among stakeholder groups to achieve engagement in the implementation of Every Student Succeeds.
Something so massive, such a huge potential impact on the system, is bound to pose a number of challenges and opportunities. Tell us a little bit about what you think is kind of the top of that list in both categories.
Well, let's start with opportunities. I believe that the new legislation will give us an opportunity to improve public education in North Carolina. It gives us the opportunity to go beyond just a test score in order to determine the success of each of our schools. It gives us an opportunity to engage the public in dialogue about what we want for our schools, what do we want our teachers to be able to do in the classroom, and what do we want our students to learn. I know that it's going to be a big challenge for us, but how do you take all of the feedback, put it together, and then go the next round of getting feedback? So I do believe it's really important that you do not adopt the policy or the practice of one and done. So you have to have more drafts. If we have 15 drafts, I will be pleased with that, because that means that we continue to get feedback, we continue to refine. So don't give up too early in making sure that, or having your plan ready. You just need to keep going over and over and over.
How do you see the strategic communication related to Every Student Succeeds kind of rolling out? And I think you've given us that, but do you want to add anything to it in light of the value of strategic communication?
Yes, we know from research that parents listen to teachers. So consequently, a part of any strategic communication plan must be to help teachers to be able to communicate with parents. We also know that teachers listen to principals. So you also have to have a part of your communication plan, principals, and what would be the messages of principals. We know that principals listen to local superintendents. So you have to have a message or messages that principals, that superintendents can use with principals, that principals can use with teachers, and teachers can use with parents. And if you have that communication plan with different, not a different message, but different strategies for all of those areas, then we know we can go much further in having people to understand what it's about and how we want to change.
Alan Morgan and Ryan Wise, Director of Education, Iowa Department of Education, on engagement through consensus building.
I mean, it sounds kind of corny, but stakeholder ownership, involvement is, it's not easy. You've got a very talented strategic communication team here in this agency.
So I feel like we're at a really interesting point in time today when we're having this conversation in early June of 2016. I feel like we're walking into a house that's just about to be renovated. And we're walking through the rooms and we're saying, hey, I think we should do this with this room and this with another room, and you know, we're going to bring other people in the house and think about how do we want to redesign this to make it fit and make it home. And I think things will naturally change as we get into that and bring more people in. And so I think getting folks in there early on to provide that input and to look at it together will be critical. So I think one of the reasons Iowa has been successful in a few areas, particularly our development of a comprehensive teacher leadership system, is because we've taken a consensus building approach that has had a clear vision of what we want to do, but has really brought in people to help shape it. Our TLC system, as we call it, was really the outgrowth of a 25-member task force that met for nearly a year to talk about, if we went down this road, what should the system look like? And so they were able to reach consensus on a number of key recommendations. The department wrote legislation that was largely aligned with the task force recommendations. It went through the legislative process, built stakeholder engagement along the way, and we ended up with our system. We've done that in a number of ways. We also just completed a comprehensive reform of career and technical education in Iowa, and are incredibly excited about the work in CTE and the connection to workforce issues to ensure that Iowans are prepared, both in their knowledge and skills, to take on the jobs of the future here in our state. And so again, that was the outgrowth of a lot of consensus building and the work of diverse constituencies coming together to really form and shape a plan that ultimately was easy for the legislature and for the governor to jump in and support. If you look at our legislation on TLC, you look at the legislation on CTE, both of those passed almost unanimously in both the House and the Senate and had the governor's signature. So when you get that front-end engagement and buy-in, it makes it easier when you get to the critical passage points.
Mm-hmm. And the real, I guess, mark of success is the degree to which practicing classroom teachers come back from this and say, this is not just another, great idea that's been, laid upon us from Des Moines. This is really an opportunity to improve practice and to improve teaching and learning. So, and it sounds like thus far, from what I gather as an outsider, that teachers in Iowa are in fact embracing this as well because they've had some ownership in the creation of the system. Is that an overstatement?
It's not an overstatement at all. And so it's exciting. I would certainly also add it hasn't been painless. And if it were painless, I'd be worried.
Right.
Because it would simply be
Sure.
more of the same.
That's right.
So I think, the fact that there are growing pains, but they're not to the extent that they're slowing down the growth is encouraging.
Alan Morgan and Johnny Key, Commissioner of Education for the Arkansas Department of Education, on creating systems to encourage engagement.
What is it that we should have asked you today that you wanted to share as a message?
Probably the business community's involvement.
Okay.
And because that has really gotten in the education world, from some circles, that seems to be a negative. That the business community is pushing us to create graduates that are good employees, that are good workers, ready to fill a slot on the line somewhere. And my experience is our employers today, our business community in Arkansas, they want the next generation of creators, of innovators. Not someone that just has an education to be able to fill a slot, but someone that gets the type of education that they become the next Bill Gates. Or many of the countless thousands of people who are creators that we don't hear about, that are really changing life for the rest of us. In Arkansas, when you have a history of some of the greatest innovators when it comes to the business world, the folks like Sam Walton, J.B. Hunt, Axiom, you look at what's happening in Arkansas, and we're going to take it to the next level. So really the opportunity to engage educators, administrators, the community, that I think that's one of our biggest assets in Arkansas, is now the ability to engage the communities, because if we're going to change the educational culture in our state and really in the nation at large, we have to do a better job of engaging the communities. Education can't be something that just takes place between 8 o'clock and 3:30 at school, 5 days a week, 9 months out of the year. Communities need to realize not only are they wanted, they are needed. And for us to really be successful, that community engagement piece has to be part of it.
The BSCP Center and Education Commission of the States would like to thank President Jeremy Anderson, Education Commission of the States, Pedro Rivera, Secretary of Education, Pennsylvania Department of Education, Joy Hoffmeister, State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Oklahoma Department of Education, June Atkinson, State Superintendent of Public Instruction, North Carolina Department of Education, Ryan Wise, Director of Education, Iowa Department of Education, Johnny Key, Commissioner of Education, Arkansas Department of Education, and Dr. Alan Morgan. This podcast is in the public domain. While permission to reprint is not necessary, links to the podcast should be cited as BSCP Center Producer, 2015, June 15th, Opportunities and Challenges Brought On with Policy Leadership Shifts in SEAs, a conversation with SEA Chiefs, BSCP Center podcast. Retrieved from http://bscpcenter.org. This podcast can be viewed on www.bspccenter.org. The podcast is prepared by the BSCP Center under Award Number S283B120042 for the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education of the U.S. Department of Education, and is administered by Advance Research Incorporated. The content of the podcast does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education or the U.S. Department of Education, nor does mention of trade names, commercial products, or organizations imply endorsement by the U.S. government.